Hello, everybody. Really appreciate you all coming out to see me, to see us. Hopefully, you'll enjoy a lot of this information that we're going to present. Today's talk is on improving digital inclusivity, especially for the folks in your community that might not be served quite as well today. I'm going to use a lot of data, and I'll tell you where that data comes from in a few minutes, to show you what we consider to be the hidden insights that might be staring you in your face, but you got to just look a little bit differently sometimes to see what's going on. I am going to give you some of the takeaways today of things that you can do right now. We'll start with like sort of no cost stuff, just a little bit of your time, and then work our way up in terms of time and resources to improve digital inclusivity on your website, and it should help you coming out of here today if you want to reach those users better today. And yeah, sound good? Mm-hmm. All right. One note, I will ask for your participation if you don't mind. Need a little bit of participation, helps bring a little bit of energy on different points today. Do your best. Appreciate it. So let's get started. I'll tell you a little bit about me first. Hello. My name is Harish Rao. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Interpersonal Frequency. I'm also a lead data scientist. You can see what's up there, what I feel really passionate about. This is all true. Believe it or not, I do wake up in the morning feeling really motivated about involving digital governments, digital presences. Our whole purpose, if you happen to see my colleague Kirsty Kenneth's talk a couple of hours ago, I think she wakes up very motivated with this thing too. But our whole purpose, there's some truth to it. Our whole purpose is to help people living in this country connect meaningfully with their governments online and to get the resources and the information that they need. And that's what we do. That's what we live for. Our company, the definition of why we call our company Interpersonal Frequency, you can see it up there on the screen. Shortest distance between 2 points of view, connecting people with their governments meaningfully is very important to us. We happen to think that we're the best way to build those government digital platforms. Where does all this data come from? It comes from a lot of people, a lot of our customers. We work exclusively with municipal and state government organizations, big cities, big counties, public libraries, water utilities, electric utilities, and so on. Today's data, we're going to really focus in on municipal data for the most part at the city and county level. But if you want to see insights for utilities or for public libraries or for state agencies, we can do that offline too. Because we have so many people using our technology every day, local governments, I can give you a really good idea of what we see is working and what's not working. But before we do that, before I define how we get some of this data, we need to start looking at the definition of success, and this is really important, and it's going to be core to the data that I'm going to show you today. So before I tell you how we look at success, I would love to just do a quick poll in this room, if you don't mind answering, just one or two quick popcorn answers. How do you all, assuming that you all run government websites, that's why we're here, how do you all define success on your government website? Can I just hear a couple of things? Don't be shy. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong.
Our constituents can access services that we provide.
Awesome. Our constituents can access services that you provide. Can I get one more before we move on? How do you define success? Shy crowd. Okay. Well, that's great. Thank you for jumping into the pool. So the folks and I at Interpersonal Frequency, we define success in a very specific way, and that's going to be important to what I'm going to be showing you. The way that we define success for a municipal government website might be a little bit different, although we only heard one, might be a little bit different than the way you think of success. Citizen user success is what we're looking at, right? So your end users, primarily your residents, your business owners, are they successful in finding the information or doing the transaction that they came to do primarily, with the primary purpose of business? That's how we look at success. Were your end users, okay, so not your employees necessarily, I'm talking about your citizens, your constituents, were they able to complete the main reason that they came to your website today, or yesterday, or any other day? And in that category, we look at two different things that are really important. One is informational success, and the other is transactional success. It's actually a third category called hybrid, but I'll explain all of that in a moment. First, I want to start with where we find a lot of things are being measured from our standpoint in the wrong way. Too many government organizations are measuring the wrong kind of data. So here's what I'm getting at here. How do you know when you're looking at your website content or your website transaction performance, how do you know if the visitors to your website are unable to find a payment portal? Are they thrown off by the keywords that they're using to get to that payment portal? Are they thrown off by the content on that payment page? Or are they alienated by a paper-based form that they might have to fill out to do that payment publication? We have to start getting deeper into how we measure success, how we measure digital inclusivity, digital equity, before we can get into what's going on and what to do. So I can't give you some of these insights without reframing that idea of success a little bit, hopefully in your minds, about how you ought to measure things in a bit. So let's start there. Can you raise your hands if you all are using Google Analytics on your website? Yeah, sure. Awesome, awesome. Nearly everybody in this room is using Google Analytics. So that's been the default standard. Nothing wrong with it, but it's been the default standard for government websites, probably for a couple of decades. But this is the hard truth. This is the hard truth that I want to start zoning in on. The traditional analytics tools can't answer some of the questions around digital inclusivity, around success, because they aren't able to measure what's not there, right? Even in the best setups that we've seen, which is in the minority, under 10%, you can only really track transactional success with a tool like Google Analytics. Did they get to the payment page? You can't see informational success as easily. So put it another way, even if you do a great job with setting up things like Google Analytics, you can only measure one dimension of success, and you can't see all the other dimensions of success. So we'll talk about this more in a minute. But let me just keep going on this topic for a moment, and then we'll get into some other things. So don't get me wrong, Google Analytics is a great tool, very useful too, but very few government organizations, and I won't name names of course, but very few government organizations we know use Google Analytics in a way, except for the metrics that historically sort of come out of the box with that tool, some of the metrics that you see on the screen there, focusing on page views and bounce rates and time on the site. Now there is of course another great keynote, or a keynote presentation tomorrow morning on Google Analytics 4, I believe. And what I'll share with you from what I know, which isn't a whole lot about Google Analytics 4, is that the shift is underway right now, and if you're using it, you should be thinking about shifting to the new version. But let's talk about some of these reports that are sort of out of the box that you might be accustomed to. Probably that many of you are using some of this data right now. Number of page views, right? So commercially, for a commercial website, the number of page views might be useful. It can express engagement if you're selling something. But the number of people coming to a page on a government website is meaningless. Most visitors to a city or county website, they aren't there by choice, right? They're, and within the site's architecture, within your site's architecture, high traffic on a page might simply mean that users are getting stuck in a particular place, right? Even if people are accessing online information and services, pages don't really tell you anything about what that experience is. And there's bounce rate. How sticky is that page, right? And I think the people in this room, me too, we've been trained, and they gotta decrease that bounce rate, Bounce rate doesn't actually matter a whole lot on your websites. You know why? 50% of your users, half of your users typically come to your website from some kind of organic search. That's what we see. So they're typing in something very specific that they want to do. I want to pay my water bill, let's say, into Google or Bing. They're coming to the page, if you have decent SEO setup, they're doing that transaction and they're leaving. So your bounce rate's really high. Well, was that citizen successful? Yeah, they were successful. But if you just look at bounce rate sort of as one dimension, you're not really understanding that whole progress. And then last, session duration, time on the site. I will say this, first time I came to you all's conference, we had just started our company, It was 8 or 9 years ago. And I remember sitting in on a session about Google Analytics, and I don't recall who the speaker was, and I know that person was doing their best job, but I remember that speaker saying very clearly, you need to get people to spend more time on your website. This is not a good idea. It wasn't a good idea then, and it's not a good idea today. Why are they spending more time on your website? No, many people are coming to do particular things. They want to get there and they want to leave, and we want to help them do that. We want to make it as efficient as possible. So session duration might signify confusion, stagnation, technical problems rather than a positive interaction. It's like being stuck in line at the DMV. So I'm going to show you some videos about where this happens and what we can do about it in a minute, but let's keep going. What I'd like for you all to potentially consider here, think of Google Analytics as a way that can offer you helpful information about your government site. It's a way to validate what you might be doing, not necessarily confirm if you're on the right strategy or not. You can't scan the primary metrics, especially the metrics right out of the box, with something like Google Analytics and draw conclusions about how well you're serving your citizens. But you can do things like figuring out who referred you or that visitor to your site with a clickable link. This is something that Google Analytics does really well. That referral report, and I think there's a version of it in the new Google Analytics as well, GA4. But it can tell you, where are the users coming to your front door? Where are they coming from? Blogger, the examples that we see often, like a blogger or something in your community has shared information about how to get like a technical subsidy for a child in a school, or how to get kids, meals before school starts, that sort of thing. Your agency ought to know if an outside resource is pushing you a lot of traffic. And then device usage discrepancies. That's actually really, really interesting. If a bunch of people are coming to your site from a particular type of devices, and let's say they're responding to a survey or something like that, you can look at those results and try to understand how they impact results. If they're using specific devices, especially older devices, we see this often, right? Those older devices, not the most latest iPhone 14 or whatever it is, especially in lower bandwidth connections, you can sometimes figure that out. 3G connections, older desktops too. That's valuable information to calculate into that digital inclusivity strategy. We see this a lot with our rural customers, rural counties, rural cities that have slower bandwidth out there. But it's not just them, this is true across the board. So without a doubt, a government agency does not, I know all of you want to connect meaningfully with your constituents, but you can't expect Google Analytics to facilitate that connection by itself. So what should you do? What should you do instead? Well, here's our first takeaway then. You can serve your community better by focusing just on one metric. This is what I want you to consider today. If there's one thing that you walk out of here today with, it's this one metric, this idea of user success. Are your constituents, are your citizens, are your users coming to your website, are they able to accomplish what they came to do on your website? Yes or no, it's a binary thing. Yes or no, their primary purpose of visit. This is the kind of government-oriented metric that I think could make a huge impact if you decide to take my advice here. It'll tell you which individuals are succeeding. I'll give you some context here, or a little bit more clues on how to do this, where they're getting frustrated, and how they feel about their overall interaction with you. Now, at interpersonal frequency, if you use somebody like us, we call these metrics user success and user satisfaction. You're going to see some of our benchmarking data related to this here in a moment. And they're at the heart, and we do have our own analytics platform. It's called Voice of Citizen. You don't have to use it to get to this kind of data. I'm going to tell you how you can get it. But what we do is we try to use our data, use all this information to enable people like you, the professionals who run government websites across the country, to learn what's working on your websites, what's not, and where you can effectively intervene. So, okay. So let's talk about this idea, user success. So what is user success? So at the core of what we do in interpersonal frequency, what you can do too, you don't have to use anything that we have necessarily, but we've got a tool called Voice of Citizen. You want to ask your visitors, and we ask visitors, two essential questions during their time on your website. Were you able to complete the purpose of your visit today? Very simple question. Ask it in a survey. Were you able to complete the purpose of your visit today? And if not, why? Very simple, but the answers are going to shed a lot of light on some complex problems. I was in a session earlier, Kirsty's session. Somebody asked, how do we know if the content changes that we've made are working, right? Kirsten, you suggested, using usability testing. Well, you can also, and that's a grade A response. I completely agree. And another way is you can ask people on the website, is it working for you or not? And if not, what's going on? So what I'm saying is, at a basic level, any basic online survey platform is going to let you ask these questions. If citizens don't find what they need, I use the word citizens to mean everybody, your residents, business owners, anybody who's coming to your website. It's a catch-all term. But if your constituents don't find what they need on your website, you may end up with a host of related and ultimately very expensive problems, right? Lines forming. I mean, these are some of the symptoms of content that's not working on a website. You have lines forming in your physical buildings for things like permits and stuff that they can do online. Your phones are ringing more than they should. One of our biggest success criteria is, do your phones stop ringing as much? Do we see an actual decrease in volume in your call centers or in your frontline operations? Email requests, or the number of email requests going down. That's another great sort of related metric. But this data will allow you to accumulate and discover what your website's potential failure points are. And sometimes those points are surprising, and that's what we're going to dive into here. A lot of the insights I'm going to share with you are based off of this type of information, and of course a lot more. Now, earlier I asked you, how do you define success? I got one answer. I told you how we define success, and but we're going to go a little bit deeper in that. So my answer is citizen user success rates on your website, and then now we're going to go one step deeper in how we look at success. Let's get into some of that data. Definitions and some trends that will help you understand how to better think of things. And I'm explaining here. Okay. 3 kinds of success. I know, this is getting a little bit complicated. Just stay with me. Right? We look at 3 kinds of success in government websites. Transactional, that's the red line. Informational, that's the dark blue line at the top, mainly at the top of the screen. And then hybrid success, which I'll explain in a moment, which is that sort of teal. Is it teal? Sure. Teal line in the middle of the screen. Okay. Let me tell you the definitions of what these things are. Informational success, and this is over time. I know it's really tiny, so the folks that you in the back can't see, but this is starting in Q1 of 2020, and it goes all the way through Q2 of 2022, so a little over 2 years. And we did select this range of data for the obvious reasons around COVID, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But information, dark blue success, that's pretty simple things. They're usually typically simple things. Think about users coming to your website. What is the address of the nearest public library branch to my home? What's on my kid's school lunch menu? Who's my elected district supervisor, and what's their email address? What kind of rental assistance program is available to me through my city or my county or my government? Right? Information. Then there's transactional success. Most of us in this room, I would guess, are trained to only look at transactional success rates, right? But this is the usual suspects. I want to pay my bill online, right? I want to submit a complaint about a pothole in my roads, or you guys missed my trash pickup. Send the truck out again. Give me a request form to get the truck out again. All right, that's that red line. And then last, the hybrid line. Hybrid's interesting. This is something we can track with our technology, a little bit harder to do with your survey. But these are users who are first looking for some kind of information and then getting to the transaction, right? So like, what kind of information do I need to pay my bill, account number, name, zip code, and then they'll go and pay the bill. That's the kind of information that a good piece of content on a bill pay page is going to do, but it's going to lead you to that place. But the one thing that I want to tell you about hybrid users, and we're going to come to them in a minute because they have an important overlap, I think, with this idea of digital equity and inclusion, is these hybrid users, from what I've seen in our data, they often overlap with first-time users of government websites. And I'm going to tell you what that means here in a second. And first-time users often overlap with underserved communities. That's another interesting sort of hidden insight that we've seen from our data. Okay. Look at these trends. These trends probably make sense to you all at some level. I wish my little pointer thingy worked, but that's all right. I don't think it works. Okay, so we're starting here. This is early Q1 2020. You have relatively high information success rate, sort of moderate to middle transactional success rates. These rates are the number of people who are affirmatively able to achieve their primary purpose of visit. Ooh, thank you. I'm gonna use this. Sorry folks, it's been a long time since I presented in person. It's the little things that help me. Okay, so here, this is the informational line, this is the hybrid line, and this is the transactional line. You can see at the beginning of COVID, not doing so hot on transactional success, 52%. So 52% of people on an average unoptimized government website are able to complete the purpose of their primary purpose of visit, which is probably pay some kind of bill or look up some kind of property record, slightly higher transactional success rates. Then COVID hits, you start to see informational numbers start to trend down a bit, a little few bumps, but generally down. This is weird. Why does transaction go up? Okay, so it took a little while. Most cities and counties ended up being including you all, ended up being the first place that people went to figure out what was going on in their community with COVID, right? It didn't really go to the states. It actually went to our cities and counties. So you all did a decent job over the first few months trying to get the information up there, and that helped people figure out what was going on. Interestingly, transaction rates went up because just more people were going. I mean, this makes sense. You start to shut your government buildings, so more people have to go online, and some of these folks who were initially going were more tech savvy. These are the folks who could work from home, that sort of folk. So the transaction rates went up, but then as the pandemic continued, you can see the trend lines continue to go down. More and more people wanted to do more stuff online, right? More transactions. Think about your public library, right? Public library building was shut, but you still wanted your book, and it took them a while to figure out how to get that curbside pickup program. Or think about permits in your community, right? Your government building's shut, but people still need their construction permits. Those transaction rates are going down because you don't have a way yet of providing those permits online. Information success rates go down because the public wants to understand what's going on, and we're not quite able to go there. Over time, you guys, everybody in general, got better at providing the information they need, but you can see that the transactional success rates continue to be depressed. This probably confirms something that you already know, which is more people want to do more online. That shift is basically permanent at this point. We don't think it's coming back from these trend lines. What I mean is more and more people are working of a certain income level and so forth. They're working from home. They expect their government to be able to do a lot more things online, and this is just the way it's going to be, it seems. A lot of barriers here to success. I'm going to break it down. But the one thing that I want you all to keep in mind, I mentioned a few moments ago, first-time user success is really important, right? And it gets worse when I start breaking these numbers down for what we call first-time users, and that's a real equity of access issue that I'll hone in on here in a moment. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, where is this data from? I'm going to tell you that. At IHEF, we have a proprietary analytics platform. It's called Voice of Citizen. We have 17 million people using our websites and our Voice of Citizen technology every day. It's a little over 5% of the US population. Our goal is to have a lot more using that technology. It's a sophisticated platform. It collects both survey-related data, kind of like the survey that you see on the screen, but it also collects quantitative data, clickstream data about what people are doing behind the scenes. And the cool thing is we can see them across multiple government websites. So if you're a county, if you're a city, you probably have 40 different platforms all hooked together, right? We can see their journey across all those different platforms and what's not working and what's not working. So let's keep going. Okay, now that we have the preliminary context out of the way, we're going to start seeing a bunch of data. Think about what grade you would give your website right now. You don't have to tell me, keep that to yourself, but think about that. And let's start diving into some success rate kind of information. Okay, government website success rates by purpose of visit. So this is primarily focused on cities and counties, right? We've excluded some of the other data sets. I know it's a little hard to see on the bottom here, but first, and I'll read these here in a second, or most of these, the blue ones are informational type of areas. The red bars are, of course, the transaction kind of areas, and then the teal bars are the hybrid areas. Researching a topic, payments and accounts, these are the corresponding success rates, general information, news, health and safety information, submitting a request or complaint, records request, applying and registering for a permit, this is the lowest that we see. Services and assistance, jobs, bids and business, board and election related data, and waste management, utility information, that sort of thing. First, the thing that you should really pop out on the screen, success rates aren't so great, right? This is the average across the United States for an unoptimized government website. This is the typical starting point that we see before you start really working on things that'll make a big difference. It's hard to understate what's happening here, but you can see the numbers are in the 50-60% range. With a couple of, there's a couple of exceptions, and we'll skip over the exceptions, but for the most part, I'm telling you that in most cases, in many cases, most cases, your website visitors fail to do what they came to do, especially on that first go around. Yeah. And in terms of digital inclusivity, we really want to start focusing on those hybrid visitors in a second, and I'll tell you a different story here. So here on this next slide, this is the user success rates for informational, transactional, and hybrid tasks. So informational success rates, now this is just, you saw that squiggly line, this is towards the end of the year, Q2 of this, excuse me, the midpoint of this year. Informational tasks, 64% success rate, transactional, under 50%, 49%, and hybrid tasks, 59%. So earlier you saw that trend, and that trend continues to not look so great. 59% are successful with those hybrid tasks, right? Here's another way of looking at this. We drill down further, and I mentioned this earlier, the beginning of the talk, that hybrid users are actually a smaller proportion of the total, right? If you add the hybrid and the transactional tasks together, these are sort of the overall task related and then the informational related. That's interesting, right? That's probably a little bit different than what you might have thought. I don't know. But keep in mind, you've got a lot of people, about half, right, that are looking for information, and the other half that are either looking to do a transaction or looking for information so they can ultimately do a transaction. And then the key piece is this next slide here. Now keep that in mind when we look at this data. Look at the success rates when you look at the frequency of visit. So what this is saying, to bottom line it, is the more often, this should make sense to you all, the more often you come to your website, the more successful you're going to be, right? Now, but the results for the first time and for the infrequent users are lower, sometimes a lot lower than the more frequent users. So, here's one of the key takeaways that I want to leave you with. From our experience, first-time users, infrequent users to your government website, they often overlap with your underserved communities, okay? This is the elderly, the disabled, those in remote areas, the unhoused populations. They often overlap with those groups. They're getting lost, they're getting frustrated, and they give up with no intention of return. So the percentage can be thought of an indicator about your level of inclusivity in your web design. And accurately and precisely identifying what impacts those first-time users is going to help you with user success. And that should be, from our standpoint, one of your top priorities in the work that you do, because that is going to actually help you improve your overall outcomes, but your diversity and equity outcomes as well. Let me show you why this is so important, right? This is a quick video, it's about 40 seconds. This is an actual user, real-time user of a government agency website. So in this example, what they're doing is they're actually looking for housing and rent assistance. You can imagine the kind of user that is looking for housing and rent type of assistance, someone who's financially in need or otherwise, right? The content on the site isn't done so well. It turns out that the program, as I understand it, for rental assistance from this particular agency has ended, but the website in turn has links to other agencies that can provide that. It's really hard to see, I know, unfortunately, especially in the back, but that user's like scrolling around trying to figure out where they can click, and they're trying to click on things that they feel should be clickable, and it's not going anywhere. So the tool you're seeing, that little video that you saw is just one example out of hundreds. It's not a test participant, it's a real life user, and one of the ways, and this is a first time user as well, and one of the ways that we review the data to see these kinds of conclusions that you're seeing, and that brings me to my takeaway for you, which is content really matters. Content really matters. Let's see if I can get to that. Tremendous amount of overlap between first-time users, underserved users in your community, and for those kinds of users who might be in the overall minority, you have an opportunity to make a big difference. I'm not going to get into the details of what kind of content you can do, but there's a lot of simple stuff that you can do that was covered in an earlier session and that we've made online available, or will be made available, I believe, the tools and that. But editing, just one key takeaway, I have a bunch of them in here, but I'm just going to say one for time. If you can make that content more readable, We talked about that flash reading score, reading ease score. This gives you a grade level. If you can make that more readable, that's going to have outsized impact on the community, right? It's going to have outsized impact on the people who need that information, and it's going to, I mean, there's another benefit, which is it's going to make your search engine optimization better too. Okay, let's keep going. Got to run through a few more of these. Okay, this data is probably not earth-shattering to anybody in this room, but this is from our data set. Majority of government website visitors come from mobile or tablet visits. This has been true for a few years now. I need you to do this with me. Raise your hand. Quick test in this room, just bear with me. Raise your hand if you have navigated to your own agency's website. I don't know your name, so it's okay. If you've navigated to your own agency's website using a mobile device in the past year. Great. Keep them up, keep them up, keep them up. What about in the past 6 months? Awesome. 3 months? Good. 2 months? 1 month? Last week? Last couple of days? Okay, cool. It's roughly maybe a little bit more than half. That's great. Now, the quandary, though, even though you always tell me, and I believe you, that you're navigating to your websites using mobile devices, I imagine you're probably using your desktop computers to take a look at your websites and to do some of the productive work on it, right? I imagine that at least. But here's what's actually going on behind the scenes, though, why I know that might be true. I'm not calling you all liars, but here's the success rates by device, right? The success rate for desktop is still, on average, higher than, by quite a few points than mobile and tablet. Now, I'm giving you these numbers in percentages, folks, but the truth is, even for a small city or county, this is hundreds of people each month. For a moderately sized county or city, this is thousands. And for a larger county, I know there's a couple of you in here, this is tens of thousands of people every single month, right? That's the dog simple truth. The success rate is several points below for mobile devices, which is how the vast majority of people now or citizen users use their website. It's a lot lower. So, yeah. Very populations we're trying to reach aren't served particularly well. I'll give you a particularly egregious example, an unnamed state agency. They had a bunch of data for homeless shelters on their website, and it was all made available only via an Excel file. Not a very good idea, do you think? But this is the kind of thing that unfortunately still persists in the world. I mean, the unhoused population typically doesn't have a desktop computer or Microsoft Excel on their phone. The solution for that particular problem is straightforward, right? Just making that information available, in an easier to digest way, in a searchable way on the website. So that brings me to my next sort of low-cost solution, building off this data. Continue to, in your case, working your website on your mobile device if you haven't already. It sounds like most of you already are, but little things, set a calendar. I mean, we try to do this in our company. Set a calendar appointment every week and try to do certain key tasks on a mobile device. Better yet, since you're already doing that, pick some areas that are highly trafficked. You probably have the analytics on which are those areas and see if it works well or not. Use your existing analytics tools to identify pieces of content on your website, what they are, highly accessed, or content that might require a third-party tool like Adobe or Excel, Microsoft Word to read and put that content in a more easy to digest way. I'm not talking about all those 18,000 board meeting minutes. I'm talking though about more relevant information to most folks that might be more highly accessed. I know it gets more complicated with forms, but the more you can use a tool to put those forms online, especially in mobile-friendly ways, that's going to give you outsized bang for your buck. It's going to take more time, might take a little bit more money, but huge impact there. Okay, let's keep going. Let's next take some data on what these people are doing. What are people doing on city and county websites? Hard to read here, but in descending order, these are the main purposes of visit. Not the only purpose of visit, main purpose of visit to city and county municipal government websites. Researching, doing some kind of payment, general information like location, hours, contact, news and events, project-related information, health and safety-related COVID data, alerts, submitting some kind of request or complaint, applying and registering for a permit, services assistance, looking for a job, boards, and then utility-related information. These are the main things that government websites, whether they residents, business owners, community groups, even your own employees, are coming to do on your website, and I'm sure there's sort of jurisdictional differences, and I'm of course focusing on one type of municipal agency, but this should give you a good idea, if you didn't know already, of what a information architecture for your website should look like, right? So these are main task areas to start. But notice how the information and hybrid tasks take up a lot of space on this graph, right? Information, hybrid. Transactional tasks, fall into more distinct categories, fewer categories. One thought that I have when I look at this data set, by the way, is how often municipal governments get caught up, candid with you, in the tools that you use to provide some of these services and some of these transactional things. But often it's the content and how you lead people to these different areas that's gonna have a big impact. Well, let's keep going here. User success by frequency of visit. You heard me talk about this earlier. Just want to reiterate, this is a fact, right? As users become more accustomed to using your website, they become more successful, right? So that's when you relaunch your website. If you've done a redesign of your website recently, if you've been tracking things like user success, probably goes down at first, and then before it goes back up, right? Because people have to be untrained from the previous way they were doing things and retrained in a new way. I'm talking about end users, not just your internal users. This is pretty normal to see. Think about a rat navigating a maze. They've gotten accustomed to navigating a maze a particular way, and when you change it, well, they have to relearn. But what does this all mean, right? So that said, this shouldn't come as much of a surprise here either, right? This is a number of people using a municipal website. Most of the users identify as residents, some as visitors to your city, county, some are businesses. Employees, that's your internal users, are 4% there. All good so far, right? This probably makes sense. Yeah, but let's see what's happening. But when we look at success rates based on relationship, there's your employees, right? 74% success rate. Whereas your residents are down here at 63%, visitors, businesses, and so forth. What's going on? What's going on? Yeah. Now, this is not so great, right? What have we been talking about? Well, we've been talking about this for a few years, but this is still the truth. Most municipal agencies are creating information architectures based on the structure of your departments, right? Structure of your departments, and not on how residents and citizens are seeking that kind of information, what they're looking for from you. This is an implicit bias, and this really affects the ability for you all to provide that equity of access, right? It precludes success for many users because you're confined to thinking by department. Residents, so to recap, residents are your biggest user group, but their success rates lag behind internal users. Now, what do we got to do about this, right? First, I'm going to give you a note of caution. Sometimes there's a lag because of a lack of awareness. I'm going to show you some data. Lack of awareness of the services and the tools that you can provide through digital means. Socioeconomic factors do influence success rates. You're looking at a map of Washington, D.C. This, for those of you familiar, this little thing here is the Anacostia River. And the tiny little squiggly numbers that you probably can't read are success rates by zip code. You can see the success rates are something over here in the core, what's called the Central Business District of the District of Columbia, and then sort of decreases as you go. You know, the interesting thing that we found when we analyzed this data is the success rates went down as the zip code, the socioeconomic status of each zip code was a little bit lower. But the weird thing is that there's actually more people in some of these outlying zip codes. Why? This example is from a few years ago with a public agency in DC. So usage rates declined, somewhat related to socioeconomic status, but more so with, but also highly so with population. And what we found here, and this is the note of caution, is simply this, which is a lot of folks in lower socioeconomic groups who could be impacted by the services, who could use some of the services that were available online, just weren't aware of it, weren't aware of the depth and the breadth of services. So the problem here wasn't necessarily let's go fix your web content. The problem here was lack of awareness. So this particular agency did something really smart from my standpoint. They looked at this data and they figured, okay, if we're trying to impact these lower socioeconomic groups, guess what? We've got an agency, a transit agency, that a lot of lower income groups use. We can advertise our digital services on that transit agency, on the buses and on the metro system. Guess what? That really worked. It significantly improved the outcomes over a few month period. So more people were coming to the website because they became aware of the depth and breadth of services available. They started to use it, and those success rates started to rise. So that's one note of caution, or just to give you my last takeaway, which is to improve your site architecture. You can do a lot with your government website, and by improving that site architecture, making it more accessible, right? Again, the number one bias that we see still to this day, probably should be the first takeaway, is most customers are still thinking implicitly about their sites in terms of departments. It's not how most people think. They don't think in departments. They think, let me give you an egregious example. We had one customer, large city. You could get a parking ticket from 3 different city agencies: Department of Transportation, Department of Sanitation, and their police department. Right? Imagine if you got a parking ticket from the city. You go online, you try to pay that parking ticket, guess what? All you see is the city's name on the parking ticket. You don't see necessarily Department of Sanitation, Transportation, or Police. You just say, oh, I got a ticket from the city, I'm gonna go online and pay. You can't pay that parking ticket unless you knew which agency gave you that parking ticket. Now that's the kind of problem that you can resolve through good site architecture, right? You could create, like, for example, a landing page saying, oh, you're looking to pay a parking ticket, look at the number on the top of it, go here to this link, pay with this agency. That's how we solved it, right? You didn't have to rework the whole system. But this is a high investment kind of thing to really rework that architecture. I know there's a lot of stuff involved with this, politics and otherwise, but this could have a huge payoff. You've got to improve your site architecture. That's going to help you in 2 ways. I mentioned that earlier. It's going to help you with your equity of access by making your site more accessible, content more accessible. It's also going to help you with the search engine results, and that's going to give you a very positive feedback loop. You do it by diving into the needs of your residents first and your employees. Second, that's easier said than done. I get it. We do this every day with our customers. One of the interview questions that we ask if you come and work at our company is this. You have a client. They have an elected official who wants to make their photo bigger on the homepage of that government's website. How do you handle this situation? I see at least a couple of smiles because I know you all have come across this problem in your lives. But what I'm saying is you're going to have to really push on that particular issue or that kind of issue, because you don't want that, in this case, that photo to be bigger. I'm not trivializing this, than the permit information that might be on the homepage. At a bigger level, at a higher level, it's about shifting some of the priorities, right? You got to think of the ways to prioritize the needs of your end users, your residents, your citizens, your business owners, your community members over your internal users. And there is going to be a bias here. There is a bias here because it's the loudest squeaky wheel that gets the grease. And the loudest squeaky wheel, folks, we know this, is going to be your fellow employees, your fellow department agency heads who are saying, this thing has to be on the home page. It takes priority over everything else that you're doing. And you're going to have to learn how to use data is one way, but you're going to have to learn how to do your best to push back on that. The biggest problem areas aren't going to be from your residents, but it's so easy to keep those kinds of issues at a distance. Why? Because there's millions or thousands, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of residents who might be sending you reports, but it's easy to keep them anonymous. It's easy to keep them anonymous. You're just getting an anonymous email or anonymous feedback form, whereas your coworker over here is telling you got to put this on the homepage. But if you know where to start, the place where to start, we think, is with that primary purpose of visit. What are your folks doing when they come to your website? Are they successful? That'll give you a pretty big head start. Which areas to prioritize your site architecture, your content. And if you've already got that part of it down, and you think that you've got that part of it down, consider getting feedback from a small panel of your local residents on improvement areas, and you can get into huge success with that. Okay, let's do some takeaways. All right. One key thing you walk out of here with: create a survey, use a free tool, use an online tool. It can give you a pretty solid clue about how to build a more inclusive website. Data show you how to extrapolate those who are digitally left behind. I've tried to offer you some ways to look at that data a little bit differently to help you that. Surveys can also help you if you have more research funds available. They can also help you figure out where to invest those research funds. So you can start to recap simply by asking, what did you do on the website today? Were you able to complete your purpose of visit? How often do you visit? Right? Those results on a simple survey is going to offer you a lot of data points, multiple source data points. You can, even if you don't want to do it on the website, you can administer it with pen and paper. The big benefit there: low cost and fast results.
Sorry, I have
Yeah.
a question, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
What is considered a decent sample size? Like, in other words, like I personally don't fill out a lot of surveys. If you have 100 people coming to your site and only 2%, is that still considered?
Over time, sure. Yeah. If you have 100 people coming to your site and only have 2 responses, that's not going to cut you too much. But over time, if you can get, if you collect data over, let's say you only have 100 visitors a day and 1 or 2 answer over a day, but you can get a survey response set over the course of a month or 2 months or 3 months of a few dozen. Ideally, it's probably 200 to 300 range. That's a pretty good start, especially if you're allowing that survey to randomly pop up for your users, right? If you do that, over time you can collect a pretty good data set. It's a great question. We'll open it up to questions here. Yeah, some takeaways on here. How do you combine that survey kind of information with qualitative information? This is one of the key research tools that works well. I think I learned it from you. We'll make this presentation available, so if you start doing some of these kinds of surveys, you can compare it to this data set. It gives you a baseline of what the minimums are. And I will sort of wrap it up by saying, we are looking at ways to track success in real time with actionable feedback. We're working on some tooling like that. It's in the prototype stages, so if you're interested in helping us do a little bit of research in our tooling, just come up and talk to me afterwards, and we're happy to show you what we're working on. We'd love your feedback. This is our own way of getting research. And then last but not least, you can get your own Voice of Citizen license through a raffle. That's our analytics platform, but you can grab, if you want to grab a Voice of Citizen license to get this kind of data, you can go there and sign up. And that's it. I want to open it up for questions. Thank you. About 10 minutes. Please.
Now, obviously, those questions that were offered in the survey were pretty specific to the experience on the website, but something that I've noticed from citizen surveys we've done the last few years is that with the amount of government distrust that's up, that satisfaction rates for certain things have gone down, even communications, just because there's a certain perception out there. Like the city that I used to work for, we got a new website and actually made a lot of improvements to the architecture, things like that. Satisfaction of the website went down in the years after that. So is there any sort of concern for that in account to getting this qualitative data?
Oh, that's why we always like to look at the primary question that I recommend you ask is not how satisfied you are with the experience. That's useful, gives you an idea of perception. That's why we really want to drive towards, on the survey side at least, the information on the transactional success rates. Are those users actually able to gain what they came to do, right? That's what you want to drive for. So I would argue, just at a basic level, satisfaction is useful, but that polarization that you're talking about just exists. It's very hard to get your message out. That's a related issue, but at the core of it, we really want to see, are they actually able to do what they came to do? And so you want to ask the question a little bit differently, or you want to analyze the data a little bit differently to drive at that.
Would you recommend when doing like community surveys, you kind of just take any sort of results about a website or communications with a grain of salt then, just because of that? I mean, I
don't know if I would take it with a grain of salt. I think that problem is a very real problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there is a bias in some of the respondents to those surveys, like the folks who are most grievously sort of affected often will respond to that. That's why you want random collection methods. what I was speaking about with you, that will help remove some of that bias in there. That's why you want to focus on those things like success rates as well. Thank you, that's a good question. Yeah, it's a major problem. More, please. Please.
And I apologize if you mentioned this right at the beginning, since I was slightly tardy, so I'm still packing up the pie or two. How do y'all collect the survey data? Is this something that's generated for each visit? Is it randomized? Is it something where it's optional to opt in to being available for surveying? Like, what are the inherent steps to the participation process?
I'm looking for a slide that explains it, and I'm squinting to do it. Yeah. So the data that I showed you today is from a randomized data set from about 17 million people living in the U.S.
Okay.
using our voice of citizen technology. Okay, so that it combines both a survey component with a behavioral tracking component, and the survey part pops up randomly for folks, and they can either opt into it or they can dismiss it. So we've got a pretty wide, and most of the benchmarking data that I was showing is from a subset of those 17 million users that are working on city and county websites. So that's where the data I was showing you was coming from. Does that?
Yeah, and I guess does that account for different things with different assistive texts and things that they might be using to interact with the site, or is that just, I mean, does it look for things like that, or?
Say a little bit more about.
If they're viewing it in using a screen reader, if that's something that you're tracking, or if they're changing it to be a different language, or if they are just trying to see some of those inherent things about the site that might be accessibility issues, if that is accounted for in how, when the survey is popping up, does it know the view that they were experiencing the content through?
It does recently, yeah. So
Okay,
it takes into
cool.
account, we made some significant upgrades to the accessibility of that whole survey thing. So when it works in screen reader software, or if there's an accessibility issue that it's compliant with WCAG 2.1 AA. In terms of language, yes, that's a great question. We do offer that in different languages, but that's great. Primarily, it's in English, though. Most of the respondents are in English. That is another area of implicit bias too. We can correct for some of that if we look at our data, right, based on the rates of usage in other languages. But that's a great area to look at. Yeah. Please.
I don't think that screeners can be tracked. I don't think you can track if a participant, if a citizen is on your site using a software like that.
Like JAWS.
Can you track that? Can you track that John?
I'm going to ask one of our folks over here.
Because technically it
see
would be the
device
same
type.
as asking someone if they are using Microsoft Word on their computer. Because it's a software outside of the browser. So I don't, and also advocacy
No.
for the users with disabilities is that they don't want to be tracked, because it oftentimes leads to, leadership decisions of, oh, well, only 1% of people come to our site with screen readers, so let's not support it.
That's a great point.
I think partly, jumping in real quickly, Harish.
Please.
No one research and data solution ever can reign supreme over all of these questions, and so that's part of why we look at that video that Harish showed is kind of a tool called Inspectlet that we can actually marry up, so we can go look up a survey response that says, no, I wasn't successful. And for not every survey response, but for some, we can then say, well, let's look at the video, why? And sort of pair that up. Oh, clearly, you have a bunch of orange text that looks like a link, because someone thought this was clickable and they got frustrated. But that's why also the disability testing, the community engagement sessions, how do we make sure that we can measure even the stuff that's not there, that's not happening yet, but that we want to move in that direction. So, and the data and the analytics, part of how we look at it internally too, is here's our springboard for where we need to dig in. Here's the big question we have that I can't get yet from this chart. So what do I need to invest in to happen?
Is that kind of like a heat map where it's able to?
Yes, Inspectlet will
Yes,
generate a heat map, and it'll generate a video of the session, so you can see exactly how they navigated and what they clicked on and where they maybe hesitated or.
Are you able to see the difference between a mouse movement and a keyboard movement?
Yes, and you can even see on mobile where they touch the screen to move it up and down. So it's a fun tool. It's a very fun tool.
So we married that tool up, as
Into
Kirsty was
Voice of
mentioning, into a Voice of Citizen, but I don't want the bigger point to be lost with all due respect to everybody here. I'd rather that you do some kind of survey and ask those questions around success, because my guess is a lot of folks in this room don't do that yet. At least that's what we've been seeing. You've got to understand what success is and what it looks like to get started. We just don't see that enough from my standpoint at least. Thank you for that. That's a good question. I think we have time for a few more. Please.
Are there any free or low-cost tools that we could use to do that, to pop up those questions?
There are.
Had clients use SurveyMonkey.
SurveyMonkey,
Even Google
yeah.
Forms, depending on the way you present it and how you're recruiting those users. It doesn't have, Voice of Citizens, a cute little pop-up in the corner, but it can be a persistent link. We had a client who could not install Voice of Citizen on their CMS due to weird issues. And so in that case, they created a banner and they created a link, and we used something called JotForm, which is another pretty low-cost
Pretty low-cost
solution
tool.
and very nice to cover and can handle a lot of traffic and all of that stuff.
The one issue with some of those lower cost tools is you're not going to get the end data collection. So I'm not necessarily saying you got to use our tool, but I would recommend you look for another low cost tool that might just do the survey component that allows you to pop that thing up at a more randomized rate. Whereas, because when you do like a SurveyMonkey kind of survey, a lot of community surveys are pushing them into the hands of the community via an email list or something like that. That's fine. If that's what you've got, that's what you've got. It's better than nothing from our standpoint. But you're going to run into some of those issues where you're getting a lot of bias. Because only the folks who want to respond to it are going to be responding to it because they have some particular issue or some particular gripe. So you've got to look at that. Somebody said this with a grain of salt.
That was me.
That kind of thing. We'll maybe look at it with a grain of salt.
As when you're randomizing it, it's just whoever gets it first,
Yeah.
ever present.
Yeah. Great. Please.
So another question to those who might be successful at achieving their goal is, did it take much longer than expected to achieve that? Because they may have achieved it, but it might have been frustrating how long it took.
Yeah, we track session duration in our platform. There are some other tools out there that can look at session duration. There are some average data points on what session duration looks like.
And we track satisfaction, so a lot of times we'll see
High
success but low satisfaction, and you're
right?
like, okay, well that hurt. You got there, but it wasn't.
And that's where satisfaction data can be helpful. Yeah, you got to look at the contrast between the two. And I would actually suggest you go there first rather than looking at, because there's some bounding issues around when you look at session duration. Like some sessions may be 5 or 6 or 10 minutes long. You're like, what's going on here? But the person was inactive for a period of time, right? But they're still on that page. It was still active. And that's why you need, this is where it gets a little complicated. Then you look at a tool like InspectLit that we marry up, and it shows the periods of inactivity. That's why looking at satisfaction along with, as a basic level, but along with that success rate is a good proxy. Do you guys agree? These are some of our researchers back here. Yeah.
I was just going to say, it's a tool to investigate further.
Yes.
I think we don't look for the answers to come out, straight up.
Failure statements that are another clue that we so we know why, and then they tell us. Sometimes it's profane outbursts of whatever, but sometimes it's a very useful clue, like, oh, this wasn't loading for me, and so I couldn't get through. And then we also know what device they were on and what browser, so we can start to look at solutions.
Patterns will emerge if you keep looking at it
Patterns will
over a
emerge.
period of time. That's a great question, though. Thank you. Maybe one more, and then I think we have to wrap it up. Well, thanks, everybody. Appreciate you all. If you want to learn a little bit more about some of the benchmarking data, you can go to that URL or come up and talk to us, and we'll happily give you some more information, some insights. Appreciate you all.